Welcome to Elim TV. This is Form 4 Biology, and taking you through Mrs. Ndiho. In Form 1, we introduced the topic biology, and we talked about the topics we're going to deal in Form 1. Now in Form 4, we have 4 topics. The first one is genetics. The second one is evolution. Then we shall move on to the support and coordination, and the last one is support. So those are the 4 lengthy, some are lengthy, some are short topics, but very interesting. So we're starting with the first topic, and that is genetics. This is a term that we described in Form 1. Remember your first lesson in Form 1 when biology was introduced. We said genetics is one of the small topics or branches of biology, and there we said is the study of inheritance and variation, where inheritance meant acquiring the characteristics from the parents through inheritance of the genetic materials, or what you call the genes, and variations, the differences which are found between members of the same species or between members of the same group, like differences among all human beings, or differences even among the same siblings, or even in a maize field. All maize plants are not the same in height, color of the leaves. Some are more green than others. The size of the fruits, they are different, etc. All those are variations. But right now in Form 4, we are looking at genetics in a more deeper way. And we first of all define the term genetics. We say it is the study of heredity, or how characteristics are passed on from parents to offsprings. So study of heredity. Study of heredity. That is how characteristics are passed on from the parents to the offsprings. Offsprings here, it means the young ones of organisms, whether plants or animals. The young ones are known as the offsprings. Now the principles of biology, that is the scientific principles that you're going to learn, they were first discovered by an Australian monk who was a scientist called Gregor Mendel. Gregor Mendel actually is described as the father of genetics. He's the one who came up with the principles that explain the hereditary of characteristics from the parents to the offsprings. So the first lesson, we are just going to look at the basic principles and the technical terms, or the commonly used terms in genetics. So we look at the terms. There are quite a lot, so it's kind of like we are forming a language, so that when I talk of homozygous, you know what it means. When I mention allele, you know what it means. So it's like the language we use in genetics. So it is important that we get right all these terms that we're going to be using in genetics from the beginning to the end. The first term we're going to learn about is the term gene. A gene, which we have used where we say, I have the genes of my father or mother. This simply means the basic unit of inheritance. It is the basic unit of inheritance. Now we have what we call the genetic material. In Form 1, we learned about the cell, and we said within the cell, we have the nucleus. And the nucleus contained what we call the chromatin material. Now the chromatin material is the genetic material that constitutes what you can call the chromosomes. And the chromosomes are made up of genes. So whether you say in the nucleus we have genetic material, or we have the chromosomes, or we have the genes, or the DNA, it all means the same. DNA, reason is the genetic material, or even the chromosomes, are made up of that chemical known as DNA, which is short for, that is the DNA is short for deoxyribonucleic ribonucleic acid. So when you talk of DNA, it's found in the nucleus and is actually the genetic material. And the basic unit, that is the unit that is responsible for inheritance of a single characteristic, is called the gene. And so each of the characteristics that we have as organisms, if you can take, for example, the human being, we have characteristics which we call the traits. That is, you have a height, you have maybe the body weight, you have the complexion, you have blood group, you have gender, whether male or female. All those are characteristics of trait, and each one of them is controlled by a single gene. So that is the gene. The next term is the allele. And allele and gene are not quite different. The difference is that an allele is an alternative form of a gene. Now, we have just talked about the gene is that basic unit of inheritance that controls a particular trait or characteristic. I want to use the trait height. So height is a characteristic of all human beings. You have a height. But it has a contrast where you can either be tall or you can also be short. So there's a gene that controls tallness and there's a gene that controls shortness. So that we can say gene for tall is a contrast of gene for short. And so an allele, like we use letters to denote the genes, we use capital T for tallness. I'll be explaining why capital. And we use a small t for shortness. And so these two, capital T and small t, are two genes, but they are alternative. So you can either have the capital T for tallness or the small t for shortness, but you cannot have, and when you have both, we'll discover what happens when we continue in the terminologies. So we say capital T is an allele of small t, or small t is an allele of capital T. So it's an alternative form of the same gene. Gene for height, but we have alternative forms. So those are alleles. You can think of other examples where we can have alleles. A good example we can use is the color pigmentation. When you have the color pigmentation, what we call the melanin, it doesn't matter whether you're very dark or very light, we all have the pigment. But you know that there's some people we call the albinos. The albinos, they lack the pigment melanin. And therefore, we're talking of the skin pigmentation, or what we may call the complexion. So you can either have normal skin pigmentation, or you can have the lack of the pigment, and so you become an albino. So it means that for the trait color pigmentation, you can have one gene which we denote as a capital A, and we have another gene that we can denote with a small a. So the capital A is an allele of the small a, and a small a is an allele of the capital A. Both of them, they give the skin pigmentation, which is one trait. And so there are many other traits you can think of. We gave a list of so many of them, and each one of them has got an allele. We will see later that a certain characteristic may only have two alleles, while others may have multiple or several alleles, like the blood group. The next terminology is dominant and recessive gene. So you're going to start with the first one, which is the dominant gene. We've already looked at a gene, which is the basic unit of inheritance, and we have already said that it can occur in two alternative forms, which we're calling the allele, denoted by a capital letter and a small letter. Now, a dominant gene is that allele that expresses itself by influencing the phenotype or the appearance of an organism in an alternative or in presence of an alternative form. For example, I know that one is a long sentence. I'll still use the same examples of height as our trait. Well, we say height has got two genes. We have a capital T for tallness, and we have a small t for shortness. And shortness in genetics, we also call it dwarfness. Now, these two genes, they are alleles. And you only inherit one from a parent. In cell division, that is in Form 3, we talked about the diploid condition and haploid condition. And we said our cells, each cell has a diploid number of chromosome or condition, which we call the 2N, that is diploid. In diploid condition, it means you have two alleles for each characteristic, whether they are similar or they are they are similar or they are not alike. For example, if we take the height, you take one gene or allele from one parent and you receive the other one from the other parent, which can be the same, so that an individual can have two genes which are alike, and in this case it's capital and capital. Another one could receive the small t and a small t each from a parent. So because there are two, we call this one diploid condition. But it can also happen that you can receive a capital T from one parent and you can receive a small t, that is the other alternative allele from the other parent. And so that means you cannot be short and tall at the same time. When you have the two capitals, it means you will automatically be tall, because a capital T means it's a gene that codes for tallness or causes tallness. You will develop to become tall. When you have received two small t's or the alleles, it means you have received, you will develop to be short, because all the alleles are for shortness. But then when one receives a dominant and a recessive gene at the same time, that is a capital and small, it means that you can either, you only be tall and not have an intermediate height. And that is because the gene that is denoted with a capital T is dominant over the gene or the other alternative allele, which is small t for shortness. And so we're saying that the capital T gene is dominant over the short t or the other alternative allele. So if I can go over that again, as we have defined it, a dominant gene is that allele that will express itself by influencing the appearance of an organism, even in presence of an alternative allele, which is the small t. Then we come to the second. I'm judging this term in this following this one, and that one is the recessive. The recessive gene. And a recessive gene is that gene or allele that can only express itself in the appearance of the organism, what I'm calling the phenotype, only in presence of a similar allele. And the example again, using our height here, the small t, which is the gene for shortness, can only make an organism or one to appear short if the other allele, so the gene for shortness, which is denoted with a small t, can only express itself in presence of a similar gene, which is also a small t, and hence that person who inherits two small t or allele similar genes will become short. So gene small t is a recessive gene. It can only express itself in presence of another similar gene. Now, those are the two terms. I want now to come to another one, which is heterozygous, the term heterozygous. Heterozygous, and the opposite of that would be homozygous. Hetero and homo are words that denote something that we are very aware of. Homo means same, hetero means different. And so in genetics, heterozygous is a condition in which the alleles for a given characteristics at a given gene locus are different. They are different. We talked about the gene having two, or rather the gene locus here, this side. And if the gene locus here, I have a capital T, that is a dominant gene for height, tallness, and another recessive gene for shortness, and so this individual will be denoted as a capital and small. So we call this one heterozygous. So two alleles are not alike. They are for the same trait, but they are like alternative forms. Then the other terminology opposite of heterozygous is homozygous. Homozygous. And homozygous then denotes a condition in an organism where the alleles denoting a particular trait are similar. They are similar. Likewise, if we use the traits or the characteristic height, then I can have a capital T and a capital T. This one will be a tall person, and he is homozygous. Homozygous, the two alleles are identical. Can you think of the other homozygous condition still using the trait height? And so, maybe you've got it right. We have the homozygous for shortness, where we have two recessive alleles. They are identical, and so we can say that this person who possesses the two recessive genes is homozygous recessive, and the other one is homozygous dominant. So with that, probably we are able then to explain, or we guess, we look at ourselves and try to explain in genetical terms the genes that we possess, or even we try to think of where we got acquired our characteristics from our parents through inheritance of characteristics. We have not yet exhausted our terminologies, but food for thought. I want you now to think about the following. The genotype. When we say genotype or phenotype, what does that mean? So do your research, and when I meet you next time, we will be able to exhaust on this very interesting topic, explanation of genetical terms.